I think, my company's mission and my personal mission is to elevate the consciousness of the world. And so for me, my ideal future is to have a world where as a globe we can expand our consciousness and we can rise to whatever our next level is as a planet and as a species.
Welcome to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner, a show about shifting our individual and collective beliefs on what is possible for the future of humanity. As our understanding of how our reality continues to shift, we are at a point of reunification between science and spirituality. What does the world look like when we break free from the generational trauma that has kept most humans playing small for thousands of years and step into our full power as the co-creators of this reality? I always ask that you keep an open mind with this podcast. Ask yourself what resonates with my truth at this time and what does not. Respect your intuition, but see if you can get through the whole show because there might be that little nugget buried deep in the conversation that unlocks something for you. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Changing the Channel. I have a wonderful guest. Their name is Aang Lakey, and they are a life and leadership coach. They offer education, group coaching, and intensives for all of their clients. So welcome to the show, Aang. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Of course. No, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so we had met at a networking event. Aang was kind of showcasing what Aang did and how they kind of shared their purpose with the world. And what caught my eye was the word consciousness. You know, Aang had that kind of on the front of the table, and I was like, I gotta go talk to this person. So the consciousness can mean a whole bunch of different things to a whole bunch of different people. So kind of fill me in. What does consciousness mean to you when you're working with people?
Yeah. And I love this question because obviously the name of my company is Increasing Consciousness. So it comes up very, very regularly. And for me, I try to keep things as simple as possible. And I like to define consciousness in terms of a general awareness of ourselves and other people and how we're all interconnected in the world. And so all of the work that I do kind of stems around this basic idea of an awareness of ourselves, others, and how we're all interconnected. And of course, I have my own spiritual beliefs about consciousness as an essence and as a living, breathing, sentient being or something of existence. But for all of the work that I do, I work mostly with leaders and leadership teams, and a lot of them are not really big into the spiritual realm, and so I try to keep it as simple as possible, for sure.
Gotcha. From your perspective, does it start with the kind of individual awareness and then it kind of grows to, group awareness, family awareness, and then eventually, hopefully, to the awareness that we are all connected, that everything is interconnected and then we're not these individualized beings per se?
Yeah. I would love to say that it starts at the individual level because, so many people who are in this world start there in the spiritual realm. But definitely what I have found in working with leadership teams is that level of conscious awareness does not normally come from themselves until some sort of outside influence kind of shakes their psyche a little bit. And as an example, let me share, I worked with this one individual for quite some time, and we'd worked together every day for 6 months. And this person was a masculine identified older white gentleman who had been in the army for his entire career. And he did not believe that, women in particular experienced any form of oppression or marginalization from society. And, every day we would have conversations and we would talk about how important it is to address some of the underlying social norms and how people are treated in the workplace and some of these kinds of things. And every day working with this person, and he was not able to see that until he had his own experience with his 2 young daughters. And, I'll never forget him, asking to talk to me and saying, I had my moment. It was a very clear moment of realization. And he walked me through his whole story about the experience that he had with his daughters, who essentially were socialized to believe that they couldn't be the president of the United States because of the simple fact that they were women. And, he's sharing about how, him and his wife have always done everything to empower them and to encourage them and to, like, tell them to shape their own destiny. And yet somehow they had this belief that they couldn't be the president because they weren't a man. And from that moment on, he became one of the biggest allies that I had in the organization that I was in and doing the work that I was doing, which was, violence prevention work, specifically sexual trauma. And, yeah, and so, like, he couldn't see it in himself, even after working one-on-one all the time for 6 months, and it took, like, an outside influence showing him a different perspective. And, unfortunately, especially with leaders, that is pretty common.
Right. Yeah. From my experience, you get to be in that leadership role and you just kind of assume that your basic belief systems have allowed you to get to that point or are, fundamentally agreed upon across most populations. And oftentimes that leadership doesn't have that mirror, doesn't have somebody telling them, hey, this is not the way that it actually is.
Yeah.
Subordinates are maybe afraid, or maybe they just don't want to approach that. They don't feel it's appropriate to approach that kind of thing. And yeah, an outside perspective is always, always beneficial for anybody, no matter what level of leadership you're at, from my perspective. The journey to finding myself started with a shift in how I viewed my health. That is why I am proud to partner with Purium, the transformation company. What if you could support your health with a system designed for today's challenges? Purium is more than a supplement company. It's a solution for regenerative health. Their whole food products include the only clinically proven glyphosate detox, helping you eliminate the toxic buildup caused by modern farming. Pair that with Beyond Organic superfoods and the most efficient source of protein on the planet, and you've got a powerhouse combination to build muscle, improve digestion, and fuel your energy levels, all while promoting deeper sleep. Plus, Purium is mission driven with planetary health in mind. They're proud to lead the way in a plastic free movement using biodegradable packaging as much as possible. True health freedom starts here. Experience the power of this regenerative healing system for yourself and witness your own transformation take place. You get 60 days to try it. And if you truly don't feel any benefit, you get fully refunded.
Yeah. And yes, it's an outside perspective, but I think there's, this emotional component of it as well that's really influential in that process. And in the research, it's actually called a significant emotional event, and something that triggers us to question our deeply held beliefs. And, for him, it was his daughter, showing him that they had been socialized outside of their family unit. And it took that emotional reaction for him to say, "Actually, this does exist."
Mm.
And because of that, now I have to question all of these other things that I thought I knew about how I'm interacting in the workplace, how I'm treating my female, colleagues and my female employees, and those kinds of things. And so, like, that emotional event was the trigger for him, outside influences, triggering that, of course.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, you talk a lot about internal shifts in leaders and how that kind of catalyzes systemic change within the organization. Maybe we can go a little bit into that because I think that plays into what we're talking about right now, where again, if the leadership holds these particular beliefs, these particular patterns, or kind of like subconscious, unconscious belief experiences, that typically filters through the organization. And, when somebody shifts or has that shift, that, significant emotional event, how does that typically change an organization and how they operate?
Yeah. Yeah, this is such a good question, and, the individuals who are leading different organizations, regardless of kind of what level they're at in the organization, everyone essentially always has the ability to create this, uh, shift in all directions, up, down, and all around. And, like, whatever I'm going through is gonna directly influence and impact everyone up, down, and around. And so, like, if I am a leader and I have a team of 10 people and I am integrating consciousness into that in terms of mindfulness practices, in terms of questioning my deeply held beliefs, in terms of trying to be more inclusive and advocating for various social policies and changes and those kinds of things, the people above me are gonna see the changes that that dynamic has on myself and my employees, and it's also gonna see it with my, peers as well, and so they're gonna actually be able to see that shift. The people who are underneath me in this environment is gonna be able to see, "Oh, Aang is actually really trying." They are questioning things, they're making sure that they're asking who's not being included and how can they include them. When I bring something to their attention, they make sure that they respond accordingly in a kind and empathetic way, and, like, they're gonna see those behaviors, and they're gonna have to either decide, do I wanna also embody those, or do I wanna just say, "You know what? Aang's doing their own thing, let them go." And then the same is true for the peers, like, they get to see all of those interactions and the impact that that has. And the really great thing about working with leaders, and the reason I work with leaders, is because everyone who's all around these individuals sees this, and they get to decide, "Oh, I really like that, and I really wanna try that." And, a quick example, when I was in the Army, I was in a command position. I was leaving command, and I did this, really intuitive thing where when I, did my out brief to the team, I shared all of their accomplishments, and so I met with everyone individually very regularly to see, where are they at, where with their goals and their, dreams and those kinds of things, even totally outside of the Army. And, by the time I left, it had been 3 years, so, I had this massive list of accomplishments that everyone in the organization had achieved. And, I didn't really think anything of it because I'd been having those conversations with everyone, but I had multiple people come up to me, peers and superiors come up to me and say, "I absolutely love this idea, and I want to use that in my next command and in my next position." And so, like, you never know the effect that your actions are going to have, on other people, and everyone always gets to choose, "I like that," or "I don't like that. I wanna try that," or "I don't wanna try that." And, I haven't shared this with you, but this is the premise of the work that I do and why I choose to work with leaders, because they have the ability to create that ripple effect.
Right. Yeah, that's been a kinda key aspect of my coaching practice and consulting practice as well, is that, again, it starts at the top. The leadership is kind of giving the direction, whether it's consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, like, people are picking up on that energy of who the leader is, and I experienced this in my own businesses when I was the leader. It was remarkable. I'd come in, I'd be frustrated, I'd be disheveled.
Mm.
Things would go wrong that day, not just with me, but with everybody in the organization. There'd be problems, there'd be fights on the crew, there'd be, bickering back and forth. And it started with me. And it wasn't until I realized, oh, this all starts with me. I have to show up in the right mindset with the right perspective. And that's going to ripple out through every other aspect. And that was a huge lesson for me at 25, 26 years old to
Yeah.
kind of realize that
Awesome.
how much my energy, how much my mood, how much my emotions
Mhm.
affected people throughout the entire organization. And at that point, we had 30, 40 guys that we were working with on a regular basis. So,
Yeah.
that shift in that, even that small of an organization, impacted me. And I was like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah, no, I love it, and to get to see the effect, one for yourself, but then also for other people. And I think, there's a certain level of awareness that is required, as individuals to be able to say, like, how is my emotional state, or how are my behaviors or my words influencing the dynamic that's happening right now? And
Mm.
it's not very often that people are able to put that into practice. And so I will say it's awesome that you were able to do that, that you were able to recognize that. And I think the goal is to be able to get as many people as possible to a place where they can kind of intuitively and in the moment process that, so that they can make adjustments to prevent themselves from leading the team in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and that's the big one, for a while, I was doing it unconsciously, I had no idea, I wasn't, I was so focused on myself and what I was doing and all the things that I had to do that day that
Mhm.
it didn't even occur to me that other people might be affected by that, that might have this, the people that were looking up to me might have, a feeling about the way that I was corresponding with them, that I was showing up in the morning. And yeah, but before I knew it, it was like things kind of got out of control, and there were a couple years where we had some tough times with the crew members, with the people that were there, and I'm very fortunate that some of the main guys stuck with us for as long as they did because, I just felt like I could have just been better. I could have been a better leader for them. I could have
Yeah.
been a better version of myself for them. Um, but I was young too.
Mm.
I was in my early 20s. I didn't go to school for leadership or anything like that. I was a finance major. So, I was just kind of learning things on my own and trying things out, seeing what stuck, seeing what didn't. And, having a mirror for myself back then would have been hugely, hugely beneficial. Consciousness is the next frontier. And at joegarner.net, we're exploring that frontier. Whether that's through one on one coaching, pre recorded programs, or free utilities to expand your awareness and your consciousness. Join me there and we'll expand what you believe is possible for your human experience. So learn more at joegarner.net and we'll expand your consciousness.
Yeah. What would you say was the moment for you of recognition?
Um, it probably like it fully sank in. I had a back injury when I was 27, I believe. My mentality was this business couldn't run without me, basically, and had a back injury. I was out for 2 months, and just to see how much everybody stepped up and how things were running when I got
Mhm,
back, and yeah, were there a couple things that could have gone a little bit smoother, of course,
mhm.
but realizing how smooth things could go without me, and how calm, like I didn't have to worry about every single thing. People could handle uh, exactly what they needed to handle throughout every experience, like every part of the day. So that
Yeah,
really shifted it for me. So I started showing up then with the idea that everybody's kind of equal, that we're all in this together versus that idea that I'm in control. I have to do everything. Everything kind of revolves around me. And that was the big shift, I think,
yeah.
in my perspective.
Alright, alright. Yeah, I see a lot of times that the only time some people can step back and have that level of awareness that's required is when some sort of outside influence, kind of creeps in. It's much, much harder to do it, I think, when you're living every day as the leader.
Right.
And the feeling like you have to be a certain way, you have to know everything, and you have to, like, make sure that you're doing all of the right things.
Yeah, and it was interesting because in the afterwards, after the event, after being out for a couple months and then coming back and having to do the healing and that whole process, it was very interesting because I kind of assigned it as this was a message for me. It wasn't just randomly that I injured my back. It was like eh, this is a sign
Yeah.
from somewhere, from my higher self, from my guides, whatever kind of perspective that you have. But this was a sign that I need to change, that I need to get out, stop doing things the way that I was doing. And I wrote about that a lot in my early 30s, where, just kind of writing about, if you're not listening to your intuition or your subconscious mind, if you're not paying attention to that, it will start to knock louder and louder and
Mhm.
louder. And then
Mhm.
eventually there will be some incident. And, I don't think that there's any circumstantial things that happen. Everything happens for a particular reason, whether you want to agree with that or not. Um, there's always an impetus for it. And even if it isn't true, even fundamentally, if there's no guiding principle behind the universe, having that perspective helps you get through those tougher times, or that difficult time. So whether it's, ad hoc, post hoc, like this has a meaning for me, or if there fundamentally is, I don't think is different. It's the exact same thing either way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I
And
totally agree. I think, most people who are spiritual in any sense of the word have this belief or faith in the divinity of the universe, and I myself am one of those people for sure. And I think it takes a certain level of awareness to have that faith as well. And for myself and for many of the people that I work with, it's how do we help them get to that space where they can, look back on their it's called reverse gap in the mind valley world, but look back on that timeline from, the moment they were born to where they are now, and all of the key events that happened, and kind of what shaped their life, and looking at that trajectory and then framing it in, if some of these things had not been done a certain way, you'd be a totally different human being. And for me, I lost my best friend when I was 17, and for 10 years, I thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And only, 10 or 11 years after the fact, was I able to see actually that was the single defining moment that put me on the path to be the person that I am. And had that one thing not happened, everything in my life would be different.
mm,
And so, yeah, it takes a certain level of awareness, and also, a certain level of being willing to look back and to think about things in a different way.
right. Was there an event that happened where that perspective shifted in you?
Well, I think definitely my best friend was one of those, well, probably my biggest one. And, I
No,
think
I
it's
mean from like viewing it as the worst thing that's ever happened to you, to viewing it from like a more positive perspective. Like, was there something that sparked that, or that was just kind of like a natural
oh.
progression?
Well, for me, it was I was in a graduate program at the time, and I was having to write about everything in my life, like how I got to where I was, the people who influenced me, and those kinds of things. So I was constantly writing and constantly writing. And, for me, it was through my writing and through my assignments of, kind of digging into the core of who I was and who I wanted to be, and those kinds of things that kind of led me to see um, that moment for what it was. And,
Mm,
of course, as a coach, there are other ways to bring that out. You don't have to consistently write about it, although journaling is really beneficial for that. I think, for me, it was all about the writing and all about the processing in the container that I was in. I was in a social work program, and so the container was just as important, for me in that regard, for
mhm.
sure.
Yeah. And now that's what you do. You offer these containers for executives to, really define who they are, and what they're here to do,
Yeah.
which is so powerful.
I think, community is such an underrated, part of the work that we do, and probably one of the biggest barriers I found that has kept leaders from really being able to kind of dive in and explore some of these thoughts and these concepts in the ways that they need, is that they typically feel like they're the only one at their organization who's like navigating these things, and they feel like they don't have people that they can talk to because, the people that they're supervising, they're supposed to be leading the way, right? And,
Mhm.
maybe their peers are not necessarily in the same environment, and maybe the people above them just don't understand the need to have, certain styles or the need to integrate consciousness into their work. And so community in particular is really, really important. And probably, I think, the biggest barrier to why some leaders can never kind of make it to that next level of really being able to understand and integrate some of the equity based concepts into their practices.
Mm. And are you creating community through internal community, or is this more of like an external community where groups of leaders are getting together?
Yeah, so, my mastermind, I have 2 different ways that they can do it, and so it's for one mastermind is an open group, and not necessarily open that anyone can come, but open in that any C-suite from any organization can join the group to be in a peer-based environment with other C-suites in their, forget the word right now, but their areas of expertise. And so,
Mm.
like, if a CEO wants to come to a group with other CEOs, they can come to that open group. And I also have a closed group in which individuals from the same organization can agree to work together in that mastermind. And so,
Mm.
one caveat though, the masterminds that I do, there's an educational component to it, and a group coaching component. And so it is the peer-based group, but they're also getting the education and the group coaching. And so and the same is true for the open and the closed groups. And so for me, education is really, really important. And so they can't dive into concepts like intersectionality and anti-oppressive based practices and what is equity and systemic change and all of those things if they don't know what that stuff is. And so there's an educational component where I teach some of these concepts, and then there's the group coaching where we explore those concepts together. And then there's the peer-based, groups in which they are sharing and they are practicing together.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds like a very holistic approach to kind of bringing this stuff into organizations such that you're doing.
Yeah, really, really important thing for me is that the work that we offer is holistic. So holistic and transdisciplinary. So we're pulling from multiple fields of research. We're making sure that it's practical and easy to implement for some of the leaders who don't work in academia or who don't understand some of the research. And I found that excuse me, in many organizations, they're either using one kind of research model and they're not necessarily looking at the larger picture, or they don't know how to implement specific concepts in practice. And so those are the big areas that we focus in on. What are all of the fields of research saying about how to do certain things, and then how do we actually practically apply those? Excuse me, practically apply those in our daily lives.
Now that's interesting. I'm interested if you would be open to kind of going into some of that research, the transsectional research, where maybe again, I think all of us are kind of familiar with maybe one or two versions, but what does the totality of the science really say about diversity, equity, inclusion, like these types of topics?
Well, I will say that, the majority of the fields of research that I pull from, the violence prevention, field, I pull from public health, I pull from, the leadership field, and I pull from, forgetting what the last component is, but there's a few components, of different areas that I pull information from. And the reason that I named my company Increasing Consciousness is because I started as a victim advocate for survivors of sexual and domestic abuse. And
Mm.
in that process, I learned that I wanted to prevent anyone from ever having to experience sexual or domestic trauma. And so from there, I kind of morphed into doing violence prevention research. So I went from doing crisis response to doing violence prevention work. And in my violence prevention work, I started really digging into the research behind why does violence happen? And all violence kind of stems from this idea of difference. And so I'm different from you, and therefore I can perpetrate harm on you.
Mm.
And also how individuals are socialized in their various contexts. And so, obviously, where people grow up, how they grow up, what languages they speak, and those kinds of things are all going to influence what I learn to be true about other people in the world. And so, when we talk about the violence prevention research, that leads us into the diversity and inclusion, because if we're talking about difference and what makes us different and how do we navigate that difference, that's more the diversity and inclusion arena. And in order to actually be able to navigate what are the beliefs that I have learned to be true in the world? Where did I learn those beliefs? Are those beliefs actually true? We have to have a foundational level of consciousness in terms of what are these thoughts? Where did they come from? How do I navigate them? And
Mm.
in order to bring that consciousness to life, we have to have some sort of practice, whether it's a mindfulness based practice or a much more broader consciousness based practice. We have to be able to have a way to sit with and process those thoughts and those beliefs and those emotions. And so for me, all of these areas are interconnected, from actual violence happening to preventing violence to preventing discrimination and harassment, the diversity and inclusion aspects of how do we make sure that everyone is included and acknowledged for who they are, and then in order to get to that part, we also have to have the consciousness and the level of awareness of all of the things that contribute to that establishment of difference. And
Mm.
so, yeah, when you talk about like a holistic approach, when I work with leaders, one of the things that I help them to understand is this continuum of, whether you're trying to prevent sexual and domestic violence or war or terrorism or whatever it is, it all kind of stems from this baseline understanding of um, what we've been socialized to believe in the world. And we have to question those beliefs and we have to navigate those beliefs. And that understanding of ourselves, of others, and how we're all interconnected is that foundational consciousness that we talk about.
Right. And I think that's the most important aspect, is that understanding of the interconnectedness of all of us, that we're
Mhm.
not these separate beings, and this was one of the topics I wanted to kind of get into, is this idea of, you know, separation
Yeah.
as an illusion versus the idea that, we're all separate, that we're all, again, we draw these lines in the sand, this is the United States and this is Canada and you're
Mhm.
different than me. Which is fundamentally true. They've been socialized differently. They've grown up in different perspectives, but that's also true about the different provinces in Canada, the different
Mhm.
states in the U.S., the different cities, that rural and more urbanized areas, and at the fundamental level, just because we have that difference in upbringing, in perspective, in beliefs, doesn't mean that deep down inside of us, again, if you want to get into like the quantum mechanical perspective, we're all just waves of energy. Like, there is no difference between your wave of energy and my wave of energy. It's just
Mhm.
experiencing itself through a different lens, a different perspective, a different idea. Um, so break that down, like the illusion of separation. How does that play out in the, you know what I would say more business oriented world, and then how does that play out across the entirety of the world?
Yeah. Um, well, I would say that while I love the language, the illusion of separation and those kinds of things, typically the audience that I work with, they're not drawn to that language, and so I try to frame it from a couple of different lenses: the diversity lens, the equity and inclusion frameworks, and I also, so sorry, I cannot clear my throat.
You're
I
good.
also try to frame it in the international context, and so most companies these days work in the international arenas, and most companies these days have employees from numerous other countries and other um, physical location.
Cultures. Yeah.
And so when I frame this, I for them, I try to frame it in a way that is understandable and relatable to them. And so it's about recognizing some of the cultural differences that exist in the workplace and how to navigate those, and some of the international laws that come into play, and then also how do we capitalize on what is happening in our teams, especially when we have a global dynamic. And I think one thing that leadership teams cannot argue about anymore is that the future is global. There's no way around it. If you want to survive as a company or a business in the future, you're gonna have to have a global lens. And that global lens is recognition that we are all one and we are all in this together. And so the concept of the illusion of separateness comes into play in the conversations that we have. We just don't use the same language.
Right. It's not a fundamental spark inside of you. It's the fact that we are all human beings on the
Mhm.
planet and we're not different. Or, just because we've been
Uh,
conditioned in different ways doesn't make us different, a different type of person.
yeah, and I will say a lot of the education that I do is built around, mm, teaching individuals, that we are all humans, and while we have very intricate and detailed versions of who we are, we talk about it in the through the lens of intersectionality, that all of those components are what actually makes our teams richer and more successful. And so in terms of creativity and innovation and those kinds of things. And so one of the things that we talk about in our educational aspects is how do we recognize and acknowledge that we all have all of these different identities while at the same time we're also all human beings and we all have the same goals. And so yeah.
How do you typically walk that line? The idea that we are different but fundamentally the same. Like what is the how do you get somebody from viewing people as different cultures, different races, different sexes as different than you, and then bring it back to, okay, fundamentally they are all the same. We are all the same.
Yeah. I think the context definitely is important. The person that I'm working with is important. And so it's gonna depend on the relationship that I have with that person on how I approach the specific topic. And so the example that I shared earlier with one of the individuals that I worked with, I knew that he didn't think that sexism was real or that women were treated any differently. And so, like, I had to consistently change my language and change the way that I interacted with him to try and help him see a different perspective. And some people never get there. Some people are never able to listen with an open heart and an open mind enough to be able to recognize, whatever that is, in terms of the difference.
Mm.
And so I'll say it's context dependent. And what I always try to do is I always try to figure out the person that I'm working with in terms of what do they actually believe about the world? How did they come to believe those things about the world? So that I can maybe frame the conversation to better fit into their model of reality. And so,
Right.
like, if I know enough about the person that I'm working with, that I know that they're never going to be able to understand from, a sexual violence perspective that sexism exists, then I have to change my approach, and I will say, this example that I shared is 20 years old now, and so, like, e I have learned a lot since then, and I definitely learned a lot in working with this particular person about how I have to adjust my style and my language and my examples and how I interact with individuals if I want them to actually create change in their lives. And so, like, this person, I love him dearly, and he really, really did become an advocate and an ally that helped me to grow personally and professionally as well. And so, it's hard if you don't know enough about the person, and it's also harder if you're not willing to make adjustments. And so,
Mm.
one of the best learning experiences that I had is that everyone has their own language and their own version of reality, and that the only way they can hear things is through that language and through that version of reality. And so the hardest work that we have to do as coaches and as mentors is figure out what is their model of reality, what is the language that they use, and how do I like try and find my way into that conversation.
Yeah, that's honestly one of my favorite parts of kind of coaching and doing it across different levels of organizations as well as just different backgrounds,
Mhm.
is me having to learn how to relate to that person, even
Yeah.
though I'm saying the same things. And, I think fundamentally this kind of goes back to the idea of all the different religions. Like, they're all saying essentially more or less the same thing,
Yeah.
different context, different, they were different cultures when it was being written. But more or less, it's all saying the same thing, that we're all the same, that,
Yeah.
there's a fundamental spark that ignited life, and that fundamental spark exists inside of us. However they framed it, however they worded it. Obviously, some went more dogmatic, some went a little bit more uh, um, philosophical with it, but more or less, they're all saying the same thing. And if you can relate to, and this is
Yeah.
where I think we're getting to a point, and honestly, having super intelligence on our side, which would be AI, an intelligence that can span across all languages, all cultures, all perspectives. In
Mhm.
theory, if it's left open, again, I'm not an AI evangelicist or anything like that, but the idea that all of those cultures could come uh, interact with something that can explain to them in their language with their
Mhm.
understanding
Mhm.
what the other religions are trying to say is powerful. And I think that is an opportunity for the human race to really make this jump from these separate individual, groups, cultures, sexes, all of that stuff into this idea of a more unified race. And do I believe that it's going to be all the same? No, I think fundamentally we are different for a reason. We all have different perspectives, different understandings, but that doesn't mean that we have to view other people as less than, as
Mhm.
different than, as, whatever term or phrase that you might say.
Yeah. And, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about this influencer. I don't know who they are, but they come up in my feed occasionally, and she talks to AI about consciousness and about helping
Mm.
other people to raise their consciousness. And, I love listening to the interactions because the AI is so smart.
So smart.
And it's going on about how, if you're trying to help someone raise their consciousness, you can't push, you can't, like, help people to see what they're not ready to see, and you have to be able to step back and to, like, just reflect and be a mirror for them because they can only rise to the level in which they're ready to rise, you know? And I just,
Mm.
1, I love that AI exists, and I also love that we are teaching AI some of these more, spiritual or consciousness-based concepts, and I love watching it grow for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be very interesting, and that kind of leads me typically to the last question that I ask any of the guests. So as we're coming through, you've got a vision of the world, what you would like to see in the world. So in the future, let's go 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the line. You've made a huge impact in the world. Um, what does that world look like to you? More from like a global perspective than necessarily like an individual or group perspective.
Yeah. I think, my company's mission and my personal mission is to elevate the consciousness of the world And so for me, my ideal future is to have a world where, as a globe, we can expand our consciousness and we can rise to whatever our next level is as a planet and as a species. And so I would say that my ideal environment is that we've made it to that next level as a planet and as a species. And, yeah, I don't think we can get there unless we have a lot of people doing a lot of work across the globe to help raise that consciousness.
Right. Any ideas as far as what that world kind of looks like? What would an average day in that world kind of look like from your perspective? Obviously,
Yeah.
this is off the cuff, like
Yeah.
not holding an iron to you or anything, but like,
Yeah.
what would that world kind of look like to you?
I think it would look very different than what it looks like today. I don't think we'll have, um traditional work in the sense that we have it now, and I think people will do what they're called to do, whether it's to be creative, to travel, to interact with different cultures and different people, and to be able to explore and to learn and grow. And so, personally, I believe that we're all a reflection of the same consciousness, trying to learn and understand. And all we're learning and understanding right now is that we're messed up in this really crazy web of, like, go to work, don't do anything else, like, try to make
Mhm.
money, and there's not a lot of learning, and there's not a lot of growth, and there's not a lot of, expansiveness in terms of our species right now. And so when I think about what that would look like, I can't even imagine it right now because I'm kind of constrained to the context of the current reality. And so
Mm.
I would say that it would probably have something to do with individuals exploring expanded states of consciousness, with individuals doing things that bring them joy, interacting with people that they want to learn and grow from, traveling and doing things that are not like going to an office and working 80 hours.
Right. Yeah, well, I think that vision is beautiful, and I think we're definitely moving towards that as we start to see, less and less people working 50, 60 hours a week. The standard work week, 40 hours a week is almost becoming, especially with productivity, different ways that we're doing things, people can get the job that they've been paid to do done in half the time, sometimes
You know?
even less than that. And the traditional business people are like, all right, well, you did half the work. We're going to add double the amount of work to you. And it's like, well, why? Why? Like, are you not making money? Like,
Yeah.
why do we have to change this just because of that old way that we did things? And yeah, did it make sense in the 50s and 60s? Of course, we were going through an industrial revolution that was fundamentally different than anything we've ever seen. The broadening of the middle class, the kind of responsibility across a much larger part of the population to be productive in society. That was huge, but we can't get stuck in that perspective. I don't think. I think we can kind of move past that and start to realize that there's enough abundance everywhere in the world that you know roughly there's $100 trillion of wealth that exists on the planet, and that's more than enough
Yeah.
for everybody to kind of operate off of.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I think shifting that perspective is, again, raising the consciousness,
Yeah.
being aware that you're not just individuals, that you're a part of a greater whole,
Yeah.
whether that's your family, your organization, your state, your country, your continent, if we want to get that kind of diluted, and then eventually the world, the entirety
Yeah.
of Earth.
And I will say too that I don't think that my vision of the future revolves at all around jobs or money. And so like those are materialistic and human centered. And so like my vision and my own desire for the future is to help people expand outside of that. Like what is actually possible as a consciousness in a human body in this corner of the universe. Like
Mhm.
it'll be much more expansive than I go to work to make money.
Right. An interconnected consciousness as
Yeah.
well. I think as we evolve consciously, so does our biology as well. And this is, you know, kind of the idea of these supernatural or these kind of sixth senses that seem to be turning on in a larger population. Whether you call that empathy, the ability to put yourself in somebody else's perspective, or you call it telepathy, I think they're both more or less saying the same thing. You're able to feel what somebody else is feeling, and in doing so, you realize that you're not any different than they are. They're feeling the same things that you are, and I think our biology also allows for this shift in consciousness, or the shift in consciousness allows for our biology to catch up. And there's definitely some disagreement among the scientific community, which one is which. You know, the quantum biologists are saying that thoughts create the biology. You know, the more traditional biologists are saying that, you know, your biology is kind of a summation of all the thoughts inside of you. So I think there's a good interplay that's happening between those, and the beauty of science is we'll get to the bottom of it as long as we continue to allow for
I
those
think what's
ideas.
important to recognize for anyone who's not in this realm is that we just can't not acknowledge that there is a connection there. And so our thoughts can create change in our physical bodies, and our physical bodies can create changes in our thoughts and in our consciousness. And you know, I'm a big fan of physics, and also of water, and how incredible water is in terms of at the spiritual and the molecular level. And you know, of course, our bodies are made mostly of water as well. And so how do our thoughts influence that? And then how are our bodies responding to various contexts? And so the person that I am now is going to be a different physical being in 6 months' time. And like the interplay there, I think, is something that we just can't ignore, regardless of which one comes first. There is an interplay, and we do need to acknowledge that. And I think it's also important too, from a coaching perspective, the impact of our thoughts and our biology. We have to focus on both if we want to get to the level that we want to be at, and we want to maintain at the level that we want to be at, for sure.
Well, that is a beautiful place to leave off. Aang, this has been a wonderful conversation. If anybody is looking, if you're in an organization, you're looking for, you know, to kind of bring this type of idea into that organization, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, if you're interested in my actual business, you're more than welcome to check out increasingconsciousness.org. Or if you're just interested in my speaking topics and what I educate people on, you can check out aanglakey.com.
Beautiful. I'll make sure I include those in the show notes. Aang, thank you again for coming on. I feel very energized after this conversation, and I hope everyone listening does as well. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for listening to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the podcast, hit the bell to know when a new show comes out, share with a friend, and rate us on whatever platform you're tuning in from. It helps get these messages out to more people to create the collective shift in reality we are here to experience. Make sure you interact with the Q&A and poll sections of the show so I can continue to provide content you enjoy. Finally, check out my website in the show notes to become a VIP of Changing the Channel and join the shift that is happening.